have sent a joint communication to the Director General of the OPCW Technical Secretariat, Mr. Uzumju, and ask him to immediately put together an independent international mission in order to visit Khan Shaykhoun, where allegedly chemical agents were used, and to visit also the Shayrat air base. The Secretary of State of the United States is considering this, and we expect that Washington will have a constructive reaction to this proposal, given the current situation. Now, given what I've just said now, also the fact that tomorrow, on the 13th of April, there will be a meeting of the Executive Council of OPCW in The Hague, where on the whole gamut of these issues will be discussed. Given all of this, we think that putting the draft to a vote today does not serve a useful purpose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to the representative of the Russian Federation. The Council is now ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. With those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2017/315, please raise their hand. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote is as follows: 10 votes in favor, 2 votes against, 3 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of Council. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I will start by giving the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. The conflict that has ravaged Syria has lasted for more than 6 years. For the people of Syria, that must feel like an eternity. Here in this chamber, we only get so many moments to act, only so many moments to show them that hope is not dead, for the world to unite in condemnation of war crimes. Today was one of those moments. What happened in Khan Shaykhoun last week was the worst of human acts. UK scientists have now analysed samples obtained from Khan Shaykhoun, and these samples have tested positive for the nerve agent sarin or a sarin-like substance. We therefore share the US assessment that it is highly likely that the regime was responsible for a sarin attack on Khan Shaykhoun. We recognise the need for a thorough, swift, independent investigation. Russia's foreign minister has this afternoon also called for such an investigation. Yet Russia has vetoed a resolution that would support that investigation. Their messages are mixed, their aims confused. The OPCW fact-finding mission and the Syrian people need our political support, something that we should have been able to give as a Security Council. The UK will continue to give this support, and regardless of today's votes, the work of the OPCW will continue. We've once again encountered a Russian veto, the 8th time that Russia has used its veto to protect the Syrian regime. This one is even more regrettable, given that Russia was the architect of the 2013 agreement to dismantle Syria's chemical weapons program, an initiative that has demonstrably failed. Russia cannot now possibly claim that it opposes the use of chemical weapons. Russia has seen the same pictures that we all saw just days ago in this chamber. How could anyone look at the faces of lifeless children and choose to veto a resolution condemning those deaths? It is indefensible that Russia has chosen to protect the perpetrators of these attacks rather than work with the rest of the international community to condemn them. When those images and videos were broadcast across screens around the world, my team received a message from another child, from Bana Alabed, the 7-year-old Syrian girl from Aleppo, who, with the help of her mother, has given the world a window into the conflict through Twitter. And the message she sent was simple. Open quotes, "You can make a difference. Demand justice for the children," close quotes. She is one voice, but one that echoes the views of millions of Syrians. Demand justice for the children. The heartbreaking truth is that a little girl's plea will not be heard in this chamber. Not today. But regardless of the veto today, trust these words. We will hold the regime to account. We will continue to work with our international partners to put an end to any use of chemical weapons and to seek justice for all the victims of these heinous chemical attacks. We will gather in the OPCW in The Hague tomorrow to discuss how best to support a credible international investigation that establishes who was responsible and paves the way to hold the culprits to account. The catastrophe in Syria is not the way it has to be. Yesterday, foreign ministers from the G7 and key regional countries came together in Italy to discuss how to move forward from last week's tragedy. They gave strong support to Secretary Tillerson's visit to Moscow today to discuss how Russia could work with the international community to end the tragedy of the war in Syria. Russia has the sort of influence over the regime that could bring to an end the regime's use of chemical weapons and barrel bombs, and could lead to a real ceasefire that then leads to the resumption of serious political negotiations on a political transition. Those foreign ministers indicated that if Russia took these steps, the international would be ready to work with Russia to bring peace to Syria, defeat Daesh and terrorism, and reconstruct Syria. So this is the choice Moscow has in front of it. The world now waits to see if Russia will respond to the G7 and assume its responsibilities as a permanent member of the Security Council to help put a stop to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons and to work with the international community to bring this tragedy to an end. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I will now give the floor to the representative of France.
President, France is dismayed by the outcome of this vote. We deeply regret the inability, thanks to a further Russian veto, for the Council to agree on a simple and balanced text to condemn and seek to shed light on what happened in Khan Shaykhoun. We sought to engage in negotiations on this draft in good faith. We have once again failed to live up to the responsibilities which we ourselves have set for ourselves. We have again failed to uphold and embody the fundamental values which we are supposed to. Some 4 years after the massacre in Ghouta in August of 2013, what a terribly retrograde step for this Council. President, the attack in Khan Shaykhoun appears to be but the latest example of the abject duplicity of a die-hard extremist regime. Once again, everything points towards the clear responsibility of the Damascus regime. With this attack, the Syrian regime has plumbed new depths of horror with complete disdain for the most fundamental principles and the most elementary principles of humanity, which, as we're all very well aware, it is continually flouted. France has always made the following point, and not as a point of dogma, but because all the evidence points to this being true. There can be no peace or security in the Middle East as long as a regime continues in power that is capable of war crimes, indeed of crimes against humanity. It is prepared to do all of that to ensure its grip on power. It is a regime that massacres its own people under the guise of the fight against terrorism, and ironically, while so doing, continues to play into Daesh's hands. Following the attack on the 4th of April, a military installation of the Syrian regime used chemical weapon production abundance was destroyed by American airstrikes. The American operation was a legitimate response to a mass crime which could not go unpunished. Bashar al-Assad, and this is a point that we've repeated in the past, bears the sole responsibility for what happened. President, Russia's veto of the 28th of February on the draft resolution aimed at punishing those responsible for the chemical attacks committed several years ago was already a dangerous indication of looming impunity. The massacre in Khan Shaykhoun should have acted as a wake-up call to all of us about our responsibilities. For those who claim to be attached to the non-proliferation regime and the fight against impunity, how can they square that with the evidence before them? How can they excuse repeatedly in such a systematic manner the barbaric use of weapons of mass destruction targeting innocent people? Nothing can justify burying one's head in the sand when faced with such atrocities. Nothing can justify the dissembling, the attempts to point the finger of blame elsewhere, and to trot out a counter-narrative, a counter-truth before the eyes of the world. President, France will not resign itself to accepting the impotence that some seek to impose on this Council. We will lend our full support to the work of the UN mechanisms and to the OPCW, including their attempts to shed light on the circumstances of this attack. The OPCW team responsible for the inquiry into the initial Syrian declaration, the Declaration Assessment Team, will continue to enjoy our full support, and the overall goal will continue to be the full dismantling of the Syrian chemical program. France is not prepared to accept impunity for those responsible for the atrocities committed in Syria. We will spare no effort so that sooner or later those responsible will answer for their crimes. France will also work to strengthen the non-proliferation regime, a regime vital for our collective security, and until today, our Council has always sought to uphold that regime. It is precisely situations of the kind in which we find ourselves today that explain the French and Mexican joint initiative on the issue of the veto, and that initiative is more topical than ever, and it fully reflects our concerns in light of what has happened just now. President, finally, this tragedy is once again a reminder that only a genuine political transition will allow us to guarantee the peace and security of the Syrian people and thus pave the way for the return to stability in the Middle East. We can no longer wait. We cannot wait for other crimes to be added to the long list of abuses committed by the Syrian regime. And no one, not even the closest supporters of the Syrian regime, can surely stomach those abuses any longer. President, we cannot let down our guard. We cannot simply give up. We owe to the victims of the chemical attack, and more broadly speaking, to all the victims of the Syrian tragedy, our continued effort. Despite the veto wielded once again today, France solemnly calls upon all the members of the Security Council to come together, set aside political division, set aside national interest, and to establish once again the complete ban on chemical weapons and to uphold that ban. We also call upon all members to support the urgent implementation of a political transition in Syria in line with the Resolution 2254 and the Geneva Communiqué. We have to be able to live up to our responsibilities and to face history. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France, and I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Madam President, Egypt has supported the draft resolution submitted by the UK, France, and the US on the basis of our interest in the Security Council carrying out its responsibilities with regard to crimes committed against the Syrian people. particularly that our Syrian brethren have suffered chemical attacks in more than once. I would like to reiterate today what I have said before, that we find it very difficult that these crimes endure with impunity. We have supported and will continue to support the principle of accountability for everyone proven to have perpetrated such inhuman acts, regardless of the reason. This includes that the Council, through all agreed procedures that aim at the truth and discovering the truth through evidence, and through the implementation of relevant Council resolutions. And accordingly, we express our extreme dismay that we have not been able to adopt this resolution and that we have failed to send a message of providing the necessary support for the truth and for uncovering the truth of what happened in Khan Shaykhoun. But I would also like to reiterate that the non-adoption must not affect in any way the objectives of the inquiry mission and with their clear mandates that are included in the Council's resolutions. And here I call on all international parties and regional parties and Syrian parties to cooperate fully with both international mechanisms as per the two resolutions 2235 and 2218 in order to achieve justice. This is the least that we all owe to the Syrian people that still endures great polarization in this Council. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Egypt, and I now give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Italy had hoped that the unity of the Council would be preserved in ensuring swift action following the latest horrors in the Syrian conflict. As an elected member of the Security Council, we feel a special responsibility to live up to the expectation that the UN membership has entrusted us to help maintain international peace and security, responsibility that today we were not able to uphold. We voted in favor of this resolution to reiterate, first, our condemnation in the strongest terms of any use of chemical weapons by anyone, anywhere and under any circumstances. Second, our support to a full-fledged investigation on the facts in Khan Shaykhoun by the OPCW fact-finding mission and, as applicable, by the UN OPCW Joint Investigative Mechanism. We call upon the Syrian government and all parties in Syria to cooperate fully with the OPCW and United Nations to allow a prompt conclusion of its investigation on this heinous incident. Third, the need to fight impunity. As long as nobody is held accountable and faces tangible consequences for war crimes and crimes against humanity, the incentive will remain to continue carrying them out. Madam President, we will do our best to ensure that even in the absence of a specific UN Security Council resolution, the mechanisms in place work to clarify facts and responsibilities of the Khan Shaykhoun attack as soon as possible. It is deeply disturbing that humanitarian international law, as well as the international non-proliferation architecture, continue to